December 9th, 2025. China and Russia launch what Beijing calls the 10th Joint Strategic Air Patrol. The message is supposed to be simple: Pacific dominance. Past the first island chain, deep blue water, no fear. And that night, CCTV edits it like a war movie. Slow motion taxi shots, afterburners, tight formations, then the money shot. J-16 fighters that look fully loaded. First clip, 4 air-to-air missiles. Then they raise the stakes. A follow-up clip shows 6 missiles, extra pylons, the whole ready-for-war package. If you're watching from a couch in Beijing, you're supposed to feel one thing: they can fight anywhere. But here's the problem. Japan wasn't watching TV. Japan was watching the aircraft. And Japan brought receipts. Because when Japan's Ministry of Defense releases high-resolution intercept photos from the actual patrol, the combat loadout doesn't just look exaggerated. It looks fake. Those J-16s aren't carrying 4 missiles. They aren't carrying 6. They're carrying 2. Total. 1 under each wing. That's not a small mismatch. That's a public exposure. Because a heavy flanker carrying only 2 missiles isn't configured for a serious fight. It's configured for one thing: not running out of fuel. And that's the first humiliation. Propaganda says combat. The photos say endurance panic. Now watch what happens when we follow the receipts all the way down. Here's what those photos really show. A J-16 is a big, drag-heavy airframe. Real missiles and real pods create real drag. Drag burns fuel. Fuel limits range. So if you want to fly deep blue, you strip the jet. Not because it looks strong, because you're terrified of hitting fuel red before you can get back to the coast. Which means December 9th wasn't a flex about we can fight anywhere. It was a confession about how light they have to fly just to show up. And then Japan's tracking data catches the parts CCTV can't edit away. The Escort doesn't stay with the bombers. It runs a relay. Wave 1 escorts the H-6 bombers just past the Miyako Strait, the gateway to the Pacific, then turns around and goes home. Wave 2 appears later, on the return leg. So for the most dangerous stretch, the deep blue segment where you'd expect escort coverage to be tightest, the bomber flies into an escort vacuum. Let that land. A strategic patrol designed to project dominance crosses into the most contested air picture, and the bomber is basically on its own. Now, the third humiliation is the one you can see with your own eyes. Japan's photos show the H-6 flying with nothing under its wings. No visible cruise missiles. No heavy strike load. No strategic threat hanging off pylons. Just empty wings and bare stations. Why? Because the moment you load real CJ-20 cruise missiles, you change the math. Heavy loads slash range. And suddenly your deep blue patrol becomes a fuel gamble. So the patrol that's supposed to demonstrate strike power ends up demonstrating something else. The exact point where the Chinese Air Force starts worrying about gas. Now add the jointness punch. Liaoning is in the wider theater, and days earlier Japan had reported aggressive carrier air behavior. But on December 9th, there's no obvious sign Liaoning is actually plugged into this patrol. No clean carrier air cover, no seamless Navy-Air Force strike chain, no one-joint machine look. So it doesn't play like a warfighting package. It plays like separate pieces moving for headlines. And then comes the consequence most viewers miss. The one that matters in a real fight. While Beijing obsessed over the visual narrative, they ignored the electromagnetic one. By flying this patrol past Japanese and American sensor nets, and allowing Japan to publish high-res photos, the PLA didn't just lose face. They donated data, loadout fingerprints, pod details, antenna orientations, radar habits, throttle profiles, heat signatures. The kind of signatures that get cataloged, and then fed into a targeting chain. So December 9th becomes the perfect demo versus endurance test. Anyone can stage a cinematic patrol once. The real question is, can you repeat it? Can you sustain it? Can you do it jointly, like the US? Because Japan's receipts didn't just contradict CCTV. They exposed the limits. And if you want to know why a so-called superpower ran a mission that looked staged, disjointed, and fuel-panicked, you don't start with propaganda. You start with the one thing propaganda can't edit: sustainment math. You hear the headline constantly. China has the world's largest navy, around 400 battle force ships. That can be true and still be misleading, because fleets don't fight on hull count headlines. They fight on sustained readiness. Every navy lives on rotation. Some ships deployed, some training, some in maintenance. So once you apply the real cycle, plus long repairs, failures, and crew shortfalls, that 400 collapses fast. Then you look at the hull mix. A big slice of China's fleet exists for nearshore work, corvettes, patrol combatants, fast missile craft. Great inside the envelope, not great for weeks of sustained operations deep in the Pacific. So once analysts filter out the training cycle, the maintenance cycle, and the coastal heavy hull mix, the number that matters becomes much smaller, more like a little over 100 ships available for sustained long-range tasking at any one time. And sustained is the key word. The US can keep major forces deployed for long periods because it has the system behind the fleet. Oilers, supply ships, maintenance capacity, trained crews, and a global support web. China's pattern beyond the first island chain often looks different. Push out, exercise, signal, return. Windows measured in weeks, not the multi-month rhythm the US system is built to sustain. Why? Because the bottleneck isn't courage, it's the logistics tail. You can build destroyers forever. If you can't feed them fuel and parts thousands of miles from home, they become floating targets. That's also why China leans on a workaround. Artificial islands in the South China Sea. Runways, ports, missile sites, sensors. Fixed nodes that try to turn reefs into forward support because sustaining distant operations is hard when the logistics web is shallow. But fixed nodes come with a brutal trade. In a real conflict, a stationary base isn't presence, it's coordinates. When sustainment is shallow, your major moves become short, predictable windows. They become stageable performances, which is exactly what December 9th looked like. Nowhere is the gap between prestige and performance wider than the carrier program. Fujian is marketed as elite because it uses electromagnetic catapults like the US Ford class. On paper, that's impressive. But a catapult is just the engine. A carrier is a system, and the system lives or dies on one thing: sortie generation. Launch, recover, refuel, rearm, relaunch, over and over without the deck choking. On US carriers, the heartbeat of that flow is prime staging space in front of the island, the pit lane that makes sustained tempo possible. The critique of Fujian is that its layout creates choke points that turn high-tempo cycles into traffic. Aircraft get pushed behind the island into cramped parking. So yes, you can launch quickly for a highlight reel, but sustaining it during a combat shift is different. Now the bottleneck nobody sees in a montage. Elevators. Many widely cited open-source summaries describe Fujian as having 2 aircraft elevators, compared with 3 on US Ford-class carriers, which means fewer pathways to move jets between hangar and flight deck. And that matters for sustained deck flow, not just one launch moment. Fewer elevators, same side flow, big aircraft, tight deck geometry. And your sortie machine starts behaving like a machine that can sprint for cameras, but struggles to sustain tempo under pressure. In August 2024, the former Soviet carrier Minsk, under renovation in China, suffered a major fire. Widely reported. You don't need conspiracy to understand the message. Carrier power isn't a slogan. It's wiring, maintenance culture, safety discipline, training, and repair capacity. But ships are only half the equation. The modern fight gets decided in the air, and in the data links behind the air. China sells the J-20 Mighty Dragon as a peer to the F-22 and F-35. It's a serious platform, but in 2025 the real question isn't how stealthy is your jet, it's this: who sees first, and who shares first? Even stealth has a vulnerable moment: heat. The second a fighter needs speed, afterburner, sustained supersonic, hard maneuver, temperatures spike, infrared contrast rises, and the fight becomes less about brochure stealth and more about the loop. Detect, share, weapon quality track, shot. That's where the US-Japan system changes the game. They fight with a fused common operating picture, sensors from air, sea, and space feeding shared tracks to pilots. So a Japanese pilot in an F-35 isn't only seeing what his own radar sees, he's seeing what the network sees. Meanwhile, thinner eyes-in-the-sky depth, airborne early warning, and tanker capacity creates limits. Fewer tankers means less time on station, and tanker limits create a clock. If you're short on tanker support, fighters arrive, conserve fuel, take one engagement window, and leave. That turns air power into predictable behavior. Dash out, take the shot, dash back. Now, at the close-range edge case, critics point out, The J-20 is widely reported to lack an internal cannon. Fine if everything stays long range. Risky if missiles are expended, spoofed, or geometry collapses into close range. The US advantage isn't a single jet. It's repeatability, consistent training tempo, consistent integration, consistent sustainment, consistent joint operations. One platform is not enough. The network is the weapon. At the end of the day, warfare isn't spec sheets, it's systems. It's what happens when people, machines, sensors, and command chains get hit with chaos at the same time, and which side keeps operating. Electronic warfare isn't noise, it's tailored disruption. False tracks, broken links, delayed coordination. It blinds one side long enough for the integrated force to keep striking. And then comes the human part, the decision layer. US and Japanese forces operate on mission-type command. Commanders understand intent and can act under degraded comms. The PLA's system is built differently. Centralized authority, political oversight embedded into units to enforce loyalty. And in a fight measured in seconds, a missile exchange, a jamming event, a sudden track that turns into an inbound threat. Any structure that forces delay, consultation, or permission-seeking becomes a lethal weakness. In modern warfare, hesitation isn't caution, it's fatal. That patrol was supposed to be a show of strength. Instead, it was a diagnostic test. Because you can edit footage, you can stage a montage, but you cannot edit out physics. And you cannot edit out the logistics required to keep forces operating for months, not moments. The US-Japan advantage is that it's built for routine warfighting. Networked sensors, shared tracks, layered defense, electronic pressure, tanker support, maintenance culture, and empowered commanders. It doesn't always look cinematic, but it works. On December 9th, the system blinked. The world watched a superpower stretch across the ocean and discover its reach exceeded its grasp. And as analysts in Tokyo and Washington archive those images of empty wings and light pylons, they're learning the most valuable lesson of all. The Dragon might look big on camera, but it's still tethered to the shore. Bye for now.